Hey everybody, welcome back to History Student Reacts. Today we'll be watching Zhang Zongchang, the Dogmeat General by Salmonella. Now Salmonella recently returned from a rather long hiatus, and he has just graced us with another video. This one is on the warlord era of Chinese history. But before we get into that, I would appreciate it if you guys would check out my Patreon. It is linked down below, and it will give you access to exclusive reaction content. Also, if you would like me to do more Salmonella reactions, feel free to leave a comment below and leave a like on the video. Anyway, with all of that out of the way, let's jump right into this reaction. That classic Salmonella song. Zhang Zongchang, the Dogmeat General.
Today I've got another character study for you all, a man known as Zhang Zongchang. In 1881, he was born into poverty in the Shandong region of China. His father was a head shaver, not a barber mind you. If a head shaver's a barber, then a ditch digger's an architect. He also moonlit as an alcoholic. His mom, meanwhile, was a literal practicing witch and exorcist, already a recipe for success. Zhang joined a group of roving bandits at age 20, as one does, right around the Xinhai Revolution, where the
Yeah, so this is a rather chaotic era of Chinese history. We have the end of the Qing dynasty, and the Qing dynasty that has ruled China for a long time up until this point has been in decline for a while, for a variety of reasons, some of them domestic, many of them international. It has not been able to stand up against Western colonialism. And so it isn't really even able to enforce its own authority within the borders of China, and the Qing dynasty comes to an end in this rebellion, though, like I said, it had been declining for a while.
The Qing dynasty was overthrown and the Republic of China was established. But in 1916, the kidneys of the nation's widely disliked monarchist leader done shat the bed, causing a power vacuum that ultimately led to what is known as the warlord era of the
Yeah, so we move from the Qing dynasty into the Republic of China, but what we move from is the Qing dynasty, this dynastic style of government, straight into a dictatorship. Then the dictator dies, and everything crumbles. We move into a very chaotic era of Chinese history called the warlord era. I'm sure you can tell from the name, but China is broken down into these territories ruled over by these often dictatorial warlords, though it did differ depending on who you were looking at. Basically an era of intense instability and chaos.
Republic. During this time, different regions of China were constantly shifting hands between a collection of separate military groups, all of whom were ruthless both to each other and to the people they ruled over.
Oh,
and through charisma, favors to the right people, and a keen sense of military pragmatism, our humble highwaymen soon came to be one of these warlords. Now, Zhang was quite skilled as a leader of war. After the Russian Civil War,
And, you want to think, what type of individual did you have to be to work your way up during this time? Pretty ruthless? Check. Pretty violent? Check. You had to be the type of guy who was willing to get stuff done. Now, there was technically an official nationalist Kuomintang government under Sun Yat-sen. At times would be more legitimate than at other times, but in reality, China was ruled over by these dictators, these territorial dictators, these warlords who each controlled their own little patch of territory within which they had ultimate control. Perfect.
He recruited thousands of fleeing white Russians, not beverages, but Bolshevik butchers, which bolstered his battalions and brought big bonuses to his bloodshed. He also made efficient use of armored trains, which proved to be highly cost-effective at transporting large amounts of troops and supplies. But that's not what you people care about. You want some clownage. Well, rest assured.
Yeah, armored trains were a big thing at this time. You could, of course, people had realized how important trains could be over the last couple decades of warfare, particularly in World War I, and so people started armoring their trains. Well, a train is good, but what about an armored train? At times they were useful, at times not very useful. I think they quickly outlived their usefulness, but this was certainly a technology of the era. And, they mentioned Russia splitting in its own civil war. Of course, this is a time of great violence in Russia, and that whole communist versus non-communist thing war will eventually make its way to China as well.
Zhang was quite the character. Now, we all know the age-old debate between positive and negative reinforcement. On the one hand, if you treat people well, you'll probably get the same treatment back later down the line. But on the other hand, nobody's ever taught a tiger to jump through flaming hoops with just pets and temptations. And if you think that's messed up, that's because, well, yeah, it is. Circuses are fucking evil. But like all great leaders, Zhang knew how to appropriately apply both the carrot and the stick. As an example of the former, he defeated the forces of enemy General Wu Peifu largely by convincing members of his army to defect, with the promise that they could keep their original rank after switching sides, which he fulfilled. But then he was like, yeah, I don't know if my loyal men would be too happy about being outranked by strangers. Well, only one solution here. All my guys are ranking up. Problem was, so many officers were promoted that Zhang literally ran out of gold and silver to make new insignias. He was like, I gotta think about this. Went out for a smoke, looked down, hey, wait a minute, and had the rest of the emblems made out of the colorful foil found in cigarette packages.
Genius! This is the type of military and frankly civil administration that we're dealing with during this era of Chinese history. Yeah, when we said that central legitimate authority had broken down, yeah, we really meant it. This is what we're dealing with.
It's said that during the promotion ceremony, people would look down and notice their little star already had a rip in it before the event was even over.
Not your
but hey, there's still
star.
a colonel or poobah or whatever now, they can't complain. On another occasion, he proudly announced that he would either win an upcoming battle or return home in his coffin. And though Zhang was many things, he was not a liar. So after he ended up retreating, his men paraded him through the streets in a casket while he waved and sheafed on a cigar. So you're probably wondering...
I will say, I talked about these warlords, how they were often authoritarian, controlled their own little provinces, of course had to be pretty violent, brutal. One other thing about these warlords is that they were quite the characters. Zhang Zongchang is one example, but there were a whole host of weird and wacky warlords from this era that otherwise would not have made it to these positions of power, but in these circumstances, they did.
Wondering why they called him the Dogmeat General. At this point, my head was swimming with lurid fantasies about him eating dog flesh or wearing dog flesh.
That's what I'm thinking.
Eating dog flesh. Turns out, nah, he was just real into Pai Gao, of which the act of playing was colloquially referred to as eating dog meat. And also because he ate dogs. He was also sometimes jokingly referred to as the three don't knows, since he didn't know how much money he had, how many concubines he had, or how many men were in his army.
Wow, this guy, he's a real genius, huh? You want someone to run your government and military well? Hey, you appoint this guy.
Funny, there was some truth to the nickname, which did sometimes cause issues. Some were minor. For one, he had a lot of trouble remembering the names of the 30 to 50 women of all nationalities in his harem.
Come on,
but he got
bro.
around this by just assigning them numbers. Number 4 is real flexible, 27 makes a killer quiche. Watch out for 14, she's a biter.
And I mean, look, when you're in your own warlord era, these guys can do whatever the hell they want. Now, eventually we will exit the warlord era into, well, frankly, an era of other types of chaos, but I guess a little more stability. But at this moment, if you're one of these warlords, you don't need to be normal. You can be completely abnormal. You can have a harem. You can have as many concubines as you want. You don't need to do anything unless you want to do it. So that sort of explains some of the abnormalities of these individuals.
And so forth. Other times, things got a little more dire. Later in his career, Zhang became the military governor of the province of Shandong. And while the warlord life suited him, domestic affairs were another story. Rampant human rights violations aside, the whole thing was just...
Reputation is one of the most brutal and ruthless warlords, and that is amongst a pretty brutal and ruthless bunch, frankly. Notorious for his hobby of splitting the skulls of prisoners with his sword and for hanging dissidents from telephone poles. Hanging dissidents from telephone poles, that is a pretty classic strategy. Several of his concubines have been forcibly seized from rich families in Shandong. Yeah, I gotta be honest, if you owned anything during this era, it would probably be stolen. And then if you owned anything in the next era of Chinese history, it would probably have been appropriated by the communists, so not good for you. Became closely connected to Shanghai's criminal gangs and the drug trade. And there is an era of the history around this point, you might think of the Triad, when Shanghai was all but run by these criminal gangs. And the drug trade was, of course, a very important part of that. So becoming closely connected to those criminal gangs as a powerful warlord, that actually makes a bit of sense.
way poorly managed. For example, while Zhang did collect taxes on everything from theater performances to tobacco examination licenses, relatively little of his extortions went towards his war efforts or anything practical, with most of it being funneled into vanity projects and his own personal riches. So how did he fund his army? Well, for those playing at home, it's time to take a shot, because Zhang printed tens of millions of dollars worth of paper money in the form of military stamps with no reserve to back them up. Obviously, massive inflation ensued, but Zhang just said, no, insisted the stamps had a one.
Classic! You don't have enough money? Hey, just print some more. Your money is becoming meaningless? Your currency is not actually in use by anybody? Just print some more. Inflation? Never heard of it.
To one conversion with real money and continued paying his men at the same rate. Fortunately for them, the invisible hand of the market is no match for the very visible fist of the soldier, because they just kick old merchant ladies' asses till they accepted the currency at face value. But unfortunately, kicking old ladies' asses can't solve everything.
I mean, look, the sort of legitimacy of your currency, well, it's only as legitimate as people think it is. And if you have, well, force on your side, then you can convince people that your currency is legitimate, and you can convince people to take it.
The summer of 1927, Shandong was hit with a famine caused primarily by drought. At the time, many people prayed to Zhang Xian, a folk deity, in an attempt to bring rain to these crusty lands. But Zhang Zongchang, he don't get on his knees for nobody. He walked right up to the statue in Xian's temple, starts bitch slapping it, tells it to go fornicate with its sister, and then has his artillery crew fire shells straight into the sky for hours on end to show that god who he's dealing with. Sources differ on when the next rain was, but it did eventually rain, so in the end, Zongchang got the last laugh. Speaking of which, our boy was also a renowned poet. Here's a piece he wrote about that very event. The sky god is also named Zhang. Why does he make life hard for me? If it doesn't rain in 3 days, I'll demolish your temple. Then I'll have cannons bombard your mind.
Wow. Now that is truly a piece of art. We think about the great poets throughout history. I think we found one here. I also love his approach to sort of traditional religion. You know, he clearly believes in it, but he does not approach it from a traditional perspective, you know, bowing down and praying to the local gods. No, he says, well, you know what? I'll demolish your damn temple if you don't bring rain, and then I'll bombard your mom. Bringing sort of a modern perspective to this whole thing. Well, maybe that worked for him, I don't know.
Truly prophetic. He's got a few other good ones too. Let me just dim the lights real quick.
Oh, great.
This one's called Visiting Mount Tai. From afar, Mount Tai looks blackish, narrow on top and wide at the bottom. If you flipped it upside down, it would be narrow at the bottom and wide on top.
Right.
I like that one a lot.
Oh,
because
brilliant.
it's like you heard about metaphors without realizing they're supposed to have a second meaning.
Yeah, it really flipped our perspective in that one.
This one's titled Poem About Bastards.
Oh, okay.
You tell me to do this, he tells me to do that. You are all bastards. Go fuck your mother. Poignant. But unlike most poets, like E. Cummings and Emily Dickinson, Zhang was quite well endowed. He was often referred to as General 86, as when Zhang Jr. stood up straight, he could reportedly reach the length of 86 Mexican silver dollars stacked atop one another, given a thickness of 2.4 millimeters.
Is that really where the name came from? If so, why was that the method of measurement?
This would put him at around 20.6 centimeters or 8.1 inches. That's especially impressive given that he was likely malnourished during puberty due to both poverty and the 1896 famine. You racist.
Not bad.
I thought of a few other jokes about this, but I couldn't fit them in the narrative, so I'll just rattle them off. Should have been called the horse meat general. When he got out of the pool, he was General 12. This one just says Dong Hung Dong. You get the point. But all great things must eventually come to an end. After suffering a series of defeats at the hands of his enemies and a subsequent failed rebellion against a quickly reunifying China.
Yes, and as we talked about, China would move into an era of, I suppose, more stability under its nationalist Kuomintang government. Sun Yat-sen would die, and it was primarily achieved under Chiang Kai-shek. Now, of course, then China would fall into chaos again with conflict between the nationalists and the communists, but we would move away from the warlord era of Chinese history towards at least a more centralized model.
He was forced to run away in 1928, bringing his mom with him to Beppu, Japan. His time here was relatively uneventful, except...
And you know, China and Japan had a lot of issues during this time period. We think of the First and Second Sino-Japanese Wars. Japan was frequently invading China. Japan would also sponsor basically any sort of chaos that could occur within China. Japan supported Sun Yat-sen, for example. While he was sort of a refugee from his own country, they wanted him to go in and cause chaos amongst the Qing dynasty. And so if you were someone who'd been kicked out of China, well, you might flee to Japan.
For when he shot a former prince in the back for trying it on with one of his concubines. In court, he said the gun just happened to go off while he was pointing it at the center of the guy's mask. For some reason, they're like, nothing suspicious here. Gave him the choice between 15 days in prison or a $150 fine. He chose the latter. Zhang's story finally came to an end in 1932 when he went back to Shandong, not as a conqueror, but as a visitor. Unfortunately, it seems it takes people more than 4 years to get over murder, because he was unceremoniously assassinated by the nephew of an officer that he had executed.
Honestly, you rise up to your position through violence, brutality, and weirdness. It seems only appropriate that you die by an act of violence in a sort of odd way.
All in all, Zhang left behind quite a strange legacy. Given the litany of horrible crimes that I've seemed to kind of gloss over, he's generally regarded as the stinkiest stain of an already messy portion of the tapestry that is Chinese history.
Wow, really? Seems like he was one of the worst, but I gotta be honest, a lot of these warlords were pretty bad. There are some exceptions, some who perhaps try to form some style of legitimate governance. A lot of them were pretty arbitrary in their actions, and like I said, a lot of them were rather strange in one way or another, but Salmonella has said that looks like Zhang was perhaps one of the worst of the group, which is pretty remarkable.
The only remaining question is if one can truly separate the art from the artist. During his rule, Time magazine described him as China's basest warlord. I'll let you decide whether or not they forgot the DE. That's all for today.
Basest.
Till next time, I'm Salmonella, and I'm hiding in your fridge.
Huh? I gotta go check my fridge real quick. Okay. Well, before I go and check my fridge, a great video by Salmonella. Now, if you'd like me to react to any of his other videos, once again, leave a like, comment down below which ones you would like me to watch. I'm glad he came back from his hiatus. This is, I believe, the second of his new videos. This was a very funny one, learning a bit about the Dogmeat general during this chaotic era of Chinese history. If you guys enjoyed this one, please subscribe, check out the Patreon, all that good stuff. I hope you guys are having a good day today, and I will see you all again next time. Goodbye.